Okay, so good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to our Wednesday webinar. Once again, a very important topic is being discussed this morning with regards to visas. And this has been so popular that we were asked for a second rerun, especially now that we're opening the economy. What was very good during the first presentation is that we had the DTI present at the webinar, which opened the door for Andreas and a lot of us to start a dialogue with the DTI, and they've really been very supportive since then. So what we're going to be doing this morning, the agenda would be just to talk about the house rules. And as I mentioned this word, I'm going to ask that you all please, keep your microphones and your videos off until the end. Andreas is going to be doing his presentation. And in the meantime, if you have questions, you're very welcome to send them to me in the chat, or you can wait to the end where you can address your questions directly with Andreas. Now, what I'd like to say about Andreas Krensel and IBN Immigration Solution is that they are a very powerful customer-centric team. Andreas has obviously, and it's on the screen right now, has been in this business for over 20 years. So he knows what he's doing. He has high success rates in achieving what is required for his clients. So Andreas, with this and without further ado, I'd like to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuela. Welcome, everybody. I hope you all have a good day. So I will try to present you the current immigration situation in the next 20-25 minutes. And then there's lots of time for questions afterwards, and I will share the agenda with you just now. So maybe just a little bit of advertising. So we're an immigration company based in South Africa, but we have also offices in Mozambique, Kenya, as well as Namibia, and we're really covering all major markets in Africa from an immigration mobility point of view. And here you see some of the faces of the lovely people I work with. All right, so what have we planned for today? So very briefly want to talk about tourist visas. I know for the audience listening in here, it's probably not of that much interest, but I just want to use this as an introduction. And then we're going to separate and distinguish between foreigners who are currently outside South Africa and then the foreigners who are inside South Africa. So what happened with their visas, with their permits? Can they work, can they not work? Okay. And then I want to very, very briefly discuss the permanent residence and citizen situation. And then we spend quite a bit of time on really practical scenarios. I built about 7 practical cases. And from the feedback we got from the first session, they were quite useful, and a lot of people found themselves within the scenarios. Okay. Then I will talk a little bit about the VFS. When will it open? Well, you all know, and I can preempt you that VFS unfortunately has not opened in level 3 so far. But I will talk about that a bit later. And then there's some practical suggestions, in my opinion, what government should do to ease the pain of the foreigners and the businesses who employ foreigners. And then, yeah, lastly, we can spend quite a bit of time on practical questions. All right, so what is the situation with tourists coming into South Africa? Now, I think it's very important also for the next hour to distinguish now between the practical side, that the borders are closed, or nearly closed, and the legal side. So I'm obviously talking more about the legal side in terms of the immigration legislation. What has South Africa done? And that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so tourists practically they can't come, we know that. But legally, tourists from high-risk countries, their visas were withdrawn. So some of these countries, or most of the countries you see below, are actually visa exempt. You all know that if you have friends from Belgium or friends from Spain, they can come into Ora Tambo or Cape Town International Airport, and they get a 90-day visitor visa upon entry. Now, this visa exemption has been withdrawn, so strictly speaking, these nationals would have to apply now for a visa, the same like Chinese nationals had to all along, or Indians, or Pakistanis, etc. Now, in terms of the legislation, and also when you look on the Home Affairs website, which by the way is sometimes a very good source of information, you will see they have a separate page for COVID. And they refer to the high-risk countries, and you see them in black down there. So these are the initial 10. Now, what is unclear to me, and it's unclear from the Home Affairs website, and also from the engagement I had subsequently with Home Affairs officials, what happens to countries like India, Brazil in particular, but also Russia, because they're missing on the initial 10. And what Home Affairs does, they refer to the website of the World Health Organization, but there is no list of high risk, medium risk, at least to my knowledge. I looked at it, I couldn't find it, okay? So this is a bit unclear, and we're seeking clearance on that. In practice, it means that legally, nationals from the Netherlands, from Belgium, Scandinavia, they could still board a plane and fly to South Africa, okay? Because their visa exemption has not been revoked, because they're not a high-risk country. And that's very important now to really understand today what is a high-risk country and what is not. Okay, now it becomes a bit more realistic and more practical. Okay, so what happens to the foreigners who are on a long-term visa, so spousal visa, study visa, work visa, any work visa, who are currently outside South Africa? So practical example, somebody flew back early March and then got surprised overseas and is kind of stuck now overseas, okay? If this person comes from a high-risk country, so again, very important, from a high-risk country, the visa has been revoked, okay? Revoked means there is no visa anymore. So, and this has been confirmed by Home Affairs, and it's also in the legislation. So in terms of the Disaster Management Act, Home Affairs has issued directions, they call them, on the 26th of March. And in there, it is clearly stipulated they are revoked, and it's not a mistake. They're revoked. So they're gone, okay? That logically means that if this whole situation hopefully normalizes and the borders might open, it would mean that these people would have to reapply for their visa. So if you had an intercompany transfer or critical skills, you are from a high-risk country, and you're currently outside South Africa in a high-risk country, then you might have to reapply. Now, before everybody gets upset about this, I think practically we need to just remember why Home Affairs did that. They did that not to remove the work visas. They had no other legal choice to stop foreigners from high-risk countries from re-entering. So it was their legal mechanism to prohibit the re-entry, okay? So obviously what I expect or hope is that Home Affairs will not force everybody to reapply, because reapply is really a new application, which means new police clearances and new medicals. But that they might say, we will reissue the visa. Okay, we will reissue it. Maybe you need to prove a negative COVID test, but we will reissue them. Or they might say, we will even reinstate them. Now, I don't know that, and I think that's one of the points we want to raise with the Department of Home Affairs. Okay, but I think at the moment, you know, I really don't hope they're forcing everybody to reapply. Very important again, this is obviously only applicable to foreigners from high-risk countries on temporary residence. Okay, so if you're a permanent residence holder, this is not applicable. Okay, or you're a citizen, it's not applicable. Okay. Oh yeah, and then lastly, very important, it's also not applicable if you're a foreigner currently inside South Africa on a temporary residence visa. This visa has not been revoked. Okay, it's only when you are outside on or after the 15th of March, as I showed in my slide. Okay, that's pretty much it to the foreigners who are outside. I come in the case scenarios to the tricky question, can they now work or not? Okay, but I come to this later. All right, then foreigners currently inside South Africa. Okay, so I think it's very important to understand that if you currently in South Africa on an expired visa, can be a visitor visa, spousal visa, whatever, then you will not be declared illegal or prohibited, and you will not be arrested, okay? This is not based on legislation, but it comes from the Home Affairs website, and also high-ranking officials have confirmed this. So I think practically, it's safe to say that you can obviously have, you don't have to expect anything negative with an expired visa. Okay. Then foreigners who wish to go home with an expired visa can do so. You know that normally that's not good, because then upon exit of South Africa, you would be declared illegal or prohibited, and you get a ban, right? But this has been explicitly abolished, okay? So you can exit South Africa until the 31st of July with an expired visa without any negative consequences. Okay? So that's very, very important to understand. Now, what happens if you don't want to exit South Africa, but you want to stay here? Then Home Affairs has very clearly said that you can extend your current status without the otherwise required Form 20. Now, what's the Form 20? Well, to simplify it, usually when you're in South Africa and your visa expires and you have not submitted an extension, you usually have to go through a legalization process. And the form at the end of this process is the Form 20, and only then can you apply for an extension, okay? So this whole process, which is very onerous and time consuming, and there's also money penalties involved, has fallen away. So anyway, if you're on an expired visa, when BFS opens, you're supposed to just be able to reapply for an extension, okay? Important is that it's not a change of status is allowed. So you can extend your visa, you can reapply for the same visa, but you can't change to another visa, okay? So that's important to note. Okay, and then the last case is really, and I don't think there are many in the country anymore, but in case you were a visitor and you came in November and you got 90 days, you extended it in March or in February already by another 90 days. So usually you can only extend a visitor visa once by 90 days. And you're still in South Africa, you could extend it another time by another 90 days. So the general rule of one extension only has been changed. Okay, last rule is really important for all employers and all people here on work visas. So if your work or study or business visa, so you conduct your own business, has expired during the lockdown, but you have applied for an extension before the lockdown, so there is an extension pending in the system, but it's not adjudicated yet, then you are clearly and explicitly allowed to continue to work or study or conduct your business. Now, this is a deviation from the usual law, because usually when you wait for a status, you're not allowed to conduct work and you're not allowed to conduct your business. So also here, there has been a concession given to the holders of these visas. Okay, so the last one is very important from a practical point of view, but I don't think these are many people, but there might be a few. All right, so the consequence out of this is, obviously, if you are a holder of a work visa which just expired and you have not applied for an extension, or the extension is not pending, well, then you're not allowed to work. And I think this is a very important point, because the fact that VFS is not opening in level 3, and we don't know how long level 3 is going to last, will affect a lot of foreigners. Because, I mean, since March, obviously people, were supposed to submit an extension beginning of March. If your visa expired since the middle of March, now we have June, VFS is not open. So there might be lots of people with expiring visas or expired visas, and they're going to run into a problem. Because yes, you legally remain in South Africa, no problem. And yes, when VFS opens, you can obviously extend, but you can't work in between, not legally, that's not allowed, okay? So that's is a big one. Okay, that really is, we're coming closer to the case scenarios. Just briefly, citizens and permanent residence holders must be permitted into South Africa. Practically, if you're still overseas, you need to notify the mission in the country where you are of your intention to come back to South Africa 72 hours before. And then obviously practically you need to get on a flight, and then you can come in. Okay, so all the rules we're discussing are not applicable for permanent residence holders as well as citizens. All right, Coming to the case scenarios. All right, the first one is a simple one. Somebody is on an intercompany transfer work visa. It was issued in 2018 and it's expiring in 2022. And this person is currently in South Africa and was in South Africa last 3 months, so hasn't left. Okay, is the visa still valid? And the simple answer is yes, nothing has changed. All the rules are not applicable for this case. Okay, so it's fairly simple. The second one is a difficult one, and there I will talk a little bit more about it. And that's a practical one. We had already 4 or 5 inquiries about this. So Mr. X is on a work visa on an ICT, was issued also in 2018, issued for 4 years, so expiring in 2022. And he left in the beginning of March to Europe, to Spain, to France, to a high-risk country. And then he was caught up by the closing of the borders, and he's currently stuck outside South Africa. So the question really is, can he work remotely for the South African company? Right? So, and that's a tricky one. So in our initial presentation, I said very strictly, no, they can't, because the visa has been revoked, right? So from an immigration perspective, it is clear that in this case scenario, the work visa has been revoked. That is clear. The consequence, however, doesn't necessarily mean that the person can't work. So subsequently, we discussed this exactly same scenario with 2 different very, very famous, well-known law firms. And it was not, well, I kind of expected it nearly because I'm a lawyer myself. Obviously, we got 2 different opinions on it. So the answer really to the question is it really depends on the position on the contract if you're allowed to work remotely while being outside. Okay, so if the work contract, and that's really a question of for labor lawyers and really depends on each individual's employment contract really. If it's clear that the work must be done in South Africa, then there's a problem because then the presence is the crucial reason. Now, if it's not, then the contract is probably still valid. And I think it's very important to note and also think about it, that Home Affairs did not intend now that everybody stops working. The intention was to stop temporary residence visa holders from re-entering into South Africa, okay? So the purpose of the legislation was that, and not necessarily the stopping of the work. So yeah, so the answer to this question very much depends on the employment contract. It depends on the position, so CEOs, CFOs, if they can still work remotely. Yeah, so the answer to this question is open, but it's not flat out no. It is a bit more complex, all right? But it is clear that the work visa has been revoked. Okay, next case. Why? A Belgian national this time has applied for a critical skills work visa and was issued with such a visa on the 10th of March. So the visa was issued, the passport was mailed back. And then the person wanted to fly on the 1st of April, which obviously wasn't possible. Now, what happened to the visa? And here, the answer is also clear that the visa has not been revoked because Belgium is not a high-risk country, okay? So it's a clear case. Obviously, practically, he needs to wait for flights. All right, next case. A Norwegian national wants to fly to South Africa with British Airways via London. Assuming this would be possible in practice, is this possible? And the answer would be no, because even the transfer through a high-risk country, and the UK is on the list of the high-risk countries, will make it impossible and the entry will be denied. Okay, if there would be direct flights from Norway, then it would be possible in theory. Okay. 3 more. Okay, now we're moving to somebody who is in South Africa. So D is in South Africa on a visitor visa expiring the 15th of June, so in 10 days, and would like to apply for a retired visa. Okay, so you would like to change the status from a visitor visa. Is this possible? Now, the answer is no, and it has nothing to do with COVID because the usual immigration legislation is applicable, and it says that you can't change your status from a visitor visa. There is one exception to the rule, but it's not applicable here. So the answer would be no, the person would have to go back and apply for a retired visa in the home country or passport country. Okay, A's on an ICT visa expiring the 1st of June and currently in South Africa, and he would like to extend the ICT. Would that be possible? So, and here the answer is, so firstly, we need to ask how long was the intercompany transfer issued. If it was issued for 2 years, then you can already apply for another 2 years. And as soon as VFS opens, this person could extend the ICT by another 2 years. Now, assuming the person already had 4 years, but he or she doesn't want to leave. So then my current interpretation is that this intercompany transfer could be extended until the 31st of July, the so-far called the cutoff. And that would be possible. If that's so practical, I'm not sure. And you know, and you might ask me why would this person do that? Because they can remain legally in South Africa. Well, the answer to this is yes, they can legally remain in South Africa, but they are not allowed to work. Okay, so that's why it makes it important for some companies to maybe extend the intercompany transfer to the 31st of July. Okay. By the way, the 31st of July, the deadline has not moved yet. My personal expectation is that they're probably going to move it and extend maybe that deadline backwards. So we need to watch that and monitor that. All right. So that's pretty much the answer to that. And then the last question really is that Kay work visa is expiring on the 30th of June, and her employment with company Z will also end, and she would like to exit then on the 20th of July. What needs to be done? So here I think it's clear that the person can enter or can exit South Africa until the 31st of July. And then Home Affairs needs to obviously indicate to Home Affairs that the employment has ended. Again, here, this is nothing new. It only becomes complex if the person would like to exit after the 31st of July, which is the current cutoff. Okay. So these are the case scenarios. So the last two slides really before the questions are opening is around VFS and Home Affairs and then some suggestions. So when I did this presentation a week ago, 1.5 weeks ago, obviously we were all hoping that they do open at level 3. We have written confirmation that DFS is not opening. I don't think it's in their hands. I think they have received instructions from DHA to not open, and also Home Affairs is not opening the permitting section. And if there's no permitting section open, then why would VFS open? It is a bit disappointing because obviously Home Affairs has always been open for very limited services to the citizens, and they have now broadened these services to all citizens. So basically the citizens can now do all their services at Home Affairs, but Home Affairs is not offering any services to foreigners, which is quite disappointing. And I said already, there are practical cases now where people are prohibited to work with expired visas, or students who are finishing their studies, they found employment and they would like to change their status and they can't. So that's really unfortunate. The SAQA is working. So SAQA obviously very important for lots of work visas. So that's working. And then the professional bodies, which are needed in terms of a lot of critical skills applications. Well, they're working remotely and have always worked remotely, but they struggle to issue the certificates. But our expectation also would be that they should go back to work now, because we all know that now the economy, with a few exceptions, is open and everybody can go back to work. So I'm not quite sure why some of the bodies are a little bit hesitant. So we know for a fact that IBASA, Institute of Business Advisors, they're planning to go back next week, but they're not definite about the answers. So that is a bit surprising to me, because I mean, level 3 regulations are clear. All right. Then coming to the borders opening. So this is obviously a big question mark. And all I can say is that I mean, I've seen an internal presentation from the Minister of Tourism speaking of February 2021 to open for international flights for tourists. In another presentation, we see November. Now we have June, so this is very far in the future, and definitely a big reason for big concern. So the solution we really suggesting, and will be also on the next slide, is maybe a opening of the borders in stages. You all know that already South Africans are allowed to exit South Africa if they have good reasons. And the good reasons is work overseas, is medical treatment overseas, and there's a couple of others. So South Africans can go and can work somewhere else. So I'm not quite sure why South Africa is not allowing the same for foreigners who have work visas or spousal visa. I mean, if you're married to a foreigner and the foreigner is currently stuck overseas, you know, I don't see any problem readmitting them. So open the borders in stages. So allow the person in first with temporary residence visas, and then maybe at a later stage for business travel, and at a later stage for tourism. I think that would make a lot of sense. And I hope that we can put this forward through various channels to the government. All right. So, and this is the last slide now, really, before the questions session can start. So what are our suggestions to the Department of Home Affairs to ease the pain? The first thing is, obviously, ideally, they would reinstate all revoked visas, right? And reinstate would mean they just reappear again. If that's not possible, reissue them and maybe add a COVID pass, like a yellow fever pass. I mean, they do this from countries from yellow fever countries, or people from yellow fever countries. But that would be definitely better than a complete reapplying. And because if they force everybody to reapply, then the missions will have a serious work overload. And I don't think it's in the best interest of the country. Then the other suggestion would be locally, really, to allow for a change from a visitor visa. So as I said, you can extend your current visa, but you can't change your status. But which forces a lot of people to go overseas and come back. And I think it would be prudent to, at least for half a year or so, deviate from the general rule and allow for a change of condition from a tourist visa locally. The next one is also a very big one. So this is one which is, if you really think about it, a little bit, maybe upsetting or disappointing. So at the moment, the missions overseas do not accept any applications, okay? Any mission, by the way, not just high-risk countries. And they obviously say, well, we're not going to accept any applications because the borders are closed. Now, that is an argument. But what we're hoping is, what they could do is that they're accepting applications, they're processing the applications, they might even issue the visas, or issue the visas under a condition that the people can only enter South Africa when the travel restrictions are lifted, or that they fall into the lifted part of the travel restrictions. So the advantage would be, as firstly, you know, we can already submit applications, and some missions take a long time. Now in Spain, it goes quick. Brussels is good, they're quick. Even The Hague is quick. But there are other countries where sometimes it takes a very, very long time. India, 16 weeks. You know, even Berlin sometimes takes 8 weeks, 6 weeks. So let's not lose these 6 weeks. Let's get the applications in now. And if in 8 weeks the travel restrictions are not lifted, but maybe eased is the better word, then these people can come in. If they can only apply in 8 weeks when the travel restrictions are starting to ease, well, then they're losing another 6 to 8 weeks. And I think that's unfair. Plus, I mean, you know, government gets paid. So, I mean, I'm not quite sure why they can't work. And it can't be COVID, because they could accept the applications by post. They have done this for years. You can do the biometrics, which is the only reason really to see the applicants. You can do the biometrics upon entry into South Africa. Do the biometrics when they land. Okay, so the virus can't really be a reason. And I think that's very important. Okay, and then the border opening, I talked about this already. I think there should be 3 stages, and they should really, really allow not just permanent residence holders, but also temporary residence holders into the country. And that's very important. I think it's unfair to keep them overseas. And then obviously there can be medical reasons like self-isolation after entry, compulsory testing before you fly, after you fly. I mean, there are tests out there will give results, or which give results in, I believe, hours or even shorter than hours. So there could be a plan around this if there would be a political will. And I think it's time to raise these concerns with the Department of Home Affairs, but also with the Department of Transport. Because the Department of Transport is really the ones for the borders and for the airports, but Home Affairs is obviously the ones who determines who could come at certain stages and who can't. Okay, all right, I hope this was fairly well explained and good to understand. So now really I open up to Manuela and the questions, because I can't really see the questions. If you have questions afterwards, you can contact me, or you can contact our Hans Kroll in Johannesburg under the emails you see in the slide. I'm not going to press this slide away this time, because last time I did and Manuela was upset with me. So over to you, Manuela, please shoot.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Right, we've got a number of questions. The first one was from Paolo Guidi, and his question is, what about a national of one of the high-risk country who officially resides in a non-high-risk country, example, Italian citizen who lives in the Netherlands? Can he or she travel back to South Africa?
Very, very good question. Because I don't really know the answer. So the legislation directive speaks of nationals of high-risk countries. So that would mean passport. Okay, so that's an answer to the question. However, obviously it makes no sense, because if you live in a low-risk country, I mean, if you live in, anyway, I don't know, Mongolia, I don't even know where now low-risk countries are, but let's assume we live there, then there shouldn't be a reason that linked to the passport. Okay, so, so far the directions really speak of passport nationals. They speak of nationals, which indicates passport. Okay.
Okay.
Next.
Our next question is from Giovanni, and his question is, I have a tourist visa expired in March and already extended until the 19th of June. Do I need to apply for a new tourist visa or other type of visa? And how can I apply if the VF Center is closed? I entered South Africa in December 2019 and I'm still in Johannesburg.
Okay, so the good news is there's nothing to worry about for this gentleman at the moment. So this gentleman, to make it more explainable for everybody else, if I understand it correctly, entered on a 90-day visitor visa. This was extended once, okay, and he got it extended. Now the extension is now expiring, and this is the case of the exception I was meaning. This is legally now allowed to extend another time. So usually you can only extend it once, but now this gentleman could extend it a second time, which gives him another 90 days, okay? Now, the second part of the question was obviously, how does he practically do it with VFS closed? Well, he can't. So the practical answer is, yeah, if VFS remains closed, you can't, and that's obviously the practical problem. But he's legally remaining until the 31st of July. There's absolutely no problem, okay? So obviously if VFS doesn't open until the 31st of July, then they must extend that deadline, because otherwise people have no option anymore, and they're not going to do that, okay? And obviously we're hoping that VFS may be open sooner than the 31st of July. So yeah, so this gentleman doesn't have to worry, but the answer would be he can extend another time.
Just to follow up on that question, Andreas, is would it show or reflect positively on his side if he approached one of like IBN Immigration Solutions or any other organization that deals with this, to start the process, so that he has shown willingness, that he has begun the process?
Look, I mean, it depends very much on the personal situation, right? So if you plan to stay another 90 days, then yes, one can now start preparing it in the hope that VFS opens soon, right? Because you want to, what you want to do is obviously once VFS opens, you want to have everything ready and kind of get an appointment early and then submit it, right? But if that's not the plan, or you know, there's no super urgency, then he can also wait and do it a little bit closer to the time when it becomes apparent that VFS is opening.
Okay, our next question is from Martin Sigorola. What will happen if someone holding a CS visa goes to the Netherlands and comes back from the Netherlands without entering a high-risk country, even being someone national from a high-risk country?
So so again, yeah. So that is very similar to the very first question, okay? So here we have the same problem, that somebody is not touching a high-risk country but has a passport from a high-risk country, okay? So And I would probably have to look again. So my current interpretation would be that, so if the purpose of the legislation was to stop people from high-risk countries from re-entering, then this visa should not be revoked, because he flies to the Netherlands, right? It's a low-risk country, so the visa will not be revoked. And I think that's the crucial part. The nationality is not so much, because also, I mean, it's important to note that this revocation is only applicable if you, on or after the 15th of March, were in a high-risk country, right? So I think it's an important one. So here, I think the CSV will remain valid. It will not be revoked, so that should be possible.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question from Julie. Why will international flights only open in February 2021? Didn't the government announce that they will be open after level 1? And what does the 31st of July deadline correspond to? Thank you very much.
Okay, so the 31st July deadline is just, so when they issued the first directive or direction regarding immigration for the COVID response, they basically determined in that legislation that the 31st of July is their deadline they set for allowing foreigners to remain in South Africa without a valid visa. Okay, they just determined that. I assume they determined that to say, well, this is our first cutoff point. Let's see how the pandemic develops. As I said, that might be extended, but at the moment, this deadline still stands. Now, regarding the flights, look, I have no answer to that. I mean, you know, my personal opinion is obviously, I mean, if you open international flights in February 2021, then we have no tourism industry anymore. So I'm not quite sure if this is really useful for the country. But that's a political and other discussion, and I don't think I know enough about that.
Thank you, Andreas. Right, next question from Isabella. We are Belgian citizens with an ICT, my husband, and a CSV, me, that applied for a PR in September 2019 based on my CSV. And then she says, our baby was born 4 months ago. We received his passport through the Belgian consulate, and we now need to apply for his visa. Should we wait till we get our PR, or do we need to apply as soon as possible when VFS reopens? And what visa will our baby need? Thank you. And okay. By the way, the baby was born in South Africa.
Okay, good. All right. So this whole scenario has nothing to do with COVID. So this is normal immigration knowledge. Okay, it has nothing to do with the situation, but I will answer that, of course. So firstly, that the permanent residence application has not been adjudicated if it was submitted late 2019. Is still normal. So in this category, yes, permanent residents take much quicker than usually. So we see turnaround times between 4 and 6 months. But obviously, you know, Home Affairs has also been in lockdown since the end of March. So the delay is, I think, fairly normal there. Okay. Now the baby needs to be landed, what we call. So the baby needs to get an accompanying parent visa. It's a visitor visa which is issued for the duration of the visa of one of the parents. So you can decide to which visa you want to extend this, to the critical skills or the intercompany transfer, probably to the one which is valid longer. I don't know, maybe they're valid at the same time. But you attach it to one of the parents, okay? And the reason is that in South Africa, you always need a valid temporary residence until you receive your permanent residence, right? So permanent residence holders don't need temporary residence, but the fact that you applied for permanent residence does not mean you don't have to have a temporary residence. So the child needs to have a temporary residence, accompanying parent visa. And then when one of the parents receives the permanent residence, then a new application for permanent residence of the child needs to be submitted, and the child needs to be attached to the permanent residence of the mother or the father.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Julie's actually given a very good question right now. How are the immigration regulations impacted by yesterday's High Court judgment declaring the lockdown regulations invalid?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I read the judgment, the whole judgment this morning. Look, firstly, we don't know if the government takes it to appeal, right? I mean, it's a High Court judgment, so the number one. Then number two is, in the end, what the judge obviously said is that you need to apply the principle of rationality to some of the regulations and some of the rules, right? And I think what Home Affairs did is rational. I mean, do I agree now practically that they still have VFS closed? No. You know, do I agree that Home Affairs doesn't do permitting? No. But if we talk about the regulations in terms of the Disaster Management Act, I think it's very rational to stop foreigners from coming into South Africa at the moment. You know, it might be not rational in November anymore or in October, but at the moment I think it's rational, and therefore I don't see really much effect there. But then again, I'm not a constitutional law expert, but I think what the Minister of Home Affairs did in terms of the Disaster Management Act is nothing bad with it. I mean, it's rational and it probably passes the test. So no consequences. In short, no consequences, I think.
At the moment, yes. No, thank you for that. Andreas, something that you have already touched upon, but obviously, you know, being Chambers of Commerce, we've had a number of our members that maybe find themselves overseas with a valid, you know, either company transfer visa or work permit visa, etc., that got caught overseas in the home country or other countries around the middle of March, and can at the moment not even work remotely because of the current laws.
Yes.
Now, a question here is, what can we maybe as chambers, bilateral chambers working together, do to move this forward? I am aware, and I know because I'm personally working with a couple of issues right now, is go directly to Home Affairs and argue each case for its own merit. But I know that in principle, it would be better to work as bilateral chambers and that. So what is your recommendation on going forward with issues such as this?
So you're absolutely right. You can obviously take individual cases up with Home Affairs and with some of the missions directly, right? I stopped my screen sharing, so I hope you, yeah. So the practical problem is obviously that you might get an exception, but then you still need to submit it at the mission. The mission is not answering, they're not open. So I see practical problems. But what I would like the government to do is as I said before, I think they should, if they allow for South Africans to work overseas and exit, if they allow South Africans coming back and permanent residents coming back, then why not allowing foreigners who have issued temporary residence visas to come back, especially when they're from low-risk countries, you know, but maybe even, I mean, is Germany maybe still a high-risk country? Probably yes, but is Germany in 3 weeks still a high-risk country? I'm not so sure, because if you look at the numbers, you know, but that's obviously a different discussion. So I think to answer number one, it's really the phased-in allowing of people to come back who have temporary residence visas, and also therefore, as a consequence, definitely force or ask the missions to accept new applications, okay, and process them, okay? I mean, so I think that's very important, number one. And then number two, practically, I would really like to know what Home Affairs considers a high-risk country. And I mean, I have asked this to Home Affairs officials, okay? And they say, well, look at the website of the World Health Organization. But that doesn't help me. And also, we must remember that asking a Home Affairs official is not a directive. It's not a legislation, okay? I know a lot of people do that, and then they get contradictory information from the same department, and that shouldn't surprise us. So look at the legislation. The legislation at the moment, in my best opinion, defines high-risk countries at 10 countries, and Brazil is missing. So I think that would be an important one, so that we have got some clarity on that. Yeah, Manuela, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we still have 10 minutes to go. Does anyone have any other questions that they'd like? And if you do and you want to ask Andreas directly, just unmute yourself, and you're welcome to put your cameras on as well. I don't see anything coming forward. Any last words from you, Andreas, before I do the official closing going forward?
No, I just thank you. I hope you found this useful. I think there's somebody waiting.
We've got a question. Yes, we've got Gilbert asking, putting his hand up. Gilbert, would you unmute yourself, please, and ask your question? Sorry, can you unmute your mic? Okay, please go ahead and ask the question.
You hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. I am now a year and a half waiting for Home Affairs with 3 lawyers for a renewal of my business visa. And the problem is, it costed me now already 110,000 rand. So for the moment, I'm in a state that I cannot leave the country because they won't let me in anymore. So
You're
I'm
right.
11 years in South Africa, was first married with a woman here. I divorced her and I started my business from scratch, a new business. I did all the paperwork. 5 years later, they give me a business visa for 5 years. I tried to renew it myself 2 years ago, and there the problem enters when DTI came in, because DTI came in and they refused me, by the lawyers I know that, they refused me because I'm not adding something to South Africa with a word that I said to James already now, and it, feasibility, that was it, feasibility.
No, I can give you the answer. So yes, so you should not leave South Africa because your visa expired before the 15th of February. So there's another deadline which I did not mention in my presentation. So if you had an expired visa before the 15th of February, then indeed you shouldn't leave South Africa. You will be declared illegal. So that is correct. Why you're waiting for 1.5 years? Well, that's I think is an individual case thing, and I you can reach out to me separately. But the DTI. So we as IBM we submitting a lot of business visa applications. As a matter of fact, probably the most of all immigration companies in South Africa, and that's the statistics we have from the DTI. It's not my own statistics. So I know very well what they're looking for and how they assess. And I have to say one thing. While I am critical about Home Affairs and the missions overseas, I am not so critical about the 5 people who are assessing business visas, because Vilna Barnett and her team are quite competent and they're quite useful. Not useful, I mean, they're good. They know what they're doing. So if the DTI doesn't recommend your business, then yes, one can reapply and one can look, but usually they know what they're doing. And I can also, maybe as a good message at the end of this seminar, and as I said, if you have individual questions, contact me. But I know from Vilna, for instance, that her message now, during this crisis, is very clear to us. Andreas, please look for foreign investors. South Africa needs foreign investment. We will do our bit. That does not mean she approves everything. But what I'm saying is there is a positive attitude towards foreign investment. And that was clearly said by the DTI towards me, and I'm sure she repeats this to other people. So yeah, and I think these are the closing remarks on the DTI, really.
Okay. So then I must go on with my lawyers after the crisis.
I think so. Yes. I think so.
I think so. It's gonna cost me a lot of rand, but thank you for the information. It gives me a kind of a hope, you see.
Okay, good. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gilbert. Any other questions? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to a time where I really need to thank all my fellow bilateral chambers that are on today, which is the Belgian Chamber, the Italian Chamber, the Nordic Chamber. Thank you very much for being part of this. And anybody else that I have forgotten, thank you. It's really been very good having you all on board. If you have any questions with regards to your visas, do not hesitate to get in touch with Andreas and his team. They are very good at what they do, and their success rate is really very high. Andreas, very big thank you to you and your team. And I ask you all to keep well and stay safe. And until our next webinar, have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.